I want to thank you, Mr. Johnson, for coming here and sharing your perspective on the history here locally with us and for the West Volusia Historical Society. The date of our recording today is February 26, 2024. I'm the interviewer, Kathy Hirsch. I'm a volunteer with the West Volusia Historical Society. So we'll start out by talking about where you were born, your early childhood. I think you were born in DeLand, weren't you?
Yes, ma'am, but Kathy, we'll probably get a better start if you'll call me Ben instead of Mister.
Okay.
That'd be a whole lot easier for us. You know, Mister was my daddy, and he always wanted to be called Jack. So let's
Okay, Ben. Let's go.
I was born right here in DeLand. And actually, I was born at DeLand Airport in 1950. It was an old military hospital. After the Stone Street Hospital closed down, they used that hospital until until Fish Memorial Hospital opened.
And that was a military hospital?
Yes, ma'am. That was a military base. It was a training base during the war. And they had a hospital there that later became a furniture store after it was a hospital, and then it burned down. But
what year was that you were born?
I'm sorry?
The year you were born was?
1950.
1950.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
My older brother was born there, and my brother, who was a little over a year younger, was born there. The other two brothers were born at Fish Memorial Hospital.
So 5 of you?
There's five boys in the family, yes, ma'am.
And so you were the oldest?
No, ma'am, I'm the second oldest. I had a brother who was 2.5 years older than I was, and one that was about 14 months younger, then one that was 5 years younger, and one that was 8 years younger.
So what did young boys do in DeLand in those days to keep themselves entertained?
You could always find something to amuse you. You know, back then the TV wasn't much to watch. You know, in the afternoon they had Uncle Walt and, programs like that, but there really wasn't much TV to watch. You know, in the mornings you'd wake up, you got up too early, you'd have to watch the test pattern. And I know you remember the test pattern. But there was a lot of outdoor playing. You know, that's where your interest played. Everybody played outdoors. You played with the kids in the neighborhood. All of your toys none of them were powered toys. It was all push toys or bicycles. Or you can get your mama's deck of cards that you used for bridge and run them on your bicycles by tying them to your spokes and listening to the noise. And of course, that came with ramifications later in the day when Mom would find out about that. But there was a lot of woods to play in. And
did you go fishing?
We used to fish with my father. We'd do that, but mainly you were talking as children. We would just amuse ourselves with our friends, football, baseball, playing in the old gator pits, which is out near the truck. It looks like you don't know what the gator pits were.
I can imagine, but the word gator is kind of scary.
Not when we were kids in them. The gator pits was John B. Stetson's gator pits. They sat, if you go down South Brooks Avenue, they sat south of that. They sat back behind the mansion. And he had several pits, and he had alligators in them.
Wow.
And there was a wishing well down in there, and it was one time had been quite a deal. When we were kids, it was grown up, and later they used them for stormwater that came off the truck route.
But there were no gators then?
No, ma'am. There were no gators in those pits when we were kids. They were just pits and basically stormwater. When the truck route was put in, they ran a pipeline from the truck route down there for stormwater. But the pits were still there, and it was woods, and it was basically in our neighborhood and our friends' neighborhood, and we spent a lot of time playing in those areas. And
were they deep enough to swim in?
No, ma'am. You wouldn't want to swim in them anyway. They were pretty, they wasn't nice water. And we'd ride horses as kids we had a very close family friends. Actually, we called them Uncle Frank and Aunt Mary Stoudemire, he was a veterinarian, and their daughters were truly like big sisters to us. And we'd ride horses, and you'd find anything to amuse yourself with. Now, you were asking about fishing. As a child, my daddy and 9 other men had built a camp up on Lake Woodruff, and it was up at Cypress Point. And we'd go down to that camp, and it was there until the federal game department had made the duck reserve, and then after that it was burnt down. They burned it down.
Did you overnight there?
I'm sorry?
Did you spend the night?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So you camped?
Oh, yes, ma'am. It was a camp. It sat up on stilts right on the edge of the lake, and you had to get to it by boat. But that was some of the best memories. And then other times he would take us down. We'd go to other camps on the river where we knew the people. One of them was Tom Odom's camp, who was the DeLand policeman. It was up north of the bridge. We'd go up and camp there, or camp on Pontoon Island. As young boys, my brothers and I spent a lot of time on Pontoon Island. And back then it was owned by, actually he was the janitor up at Stetson, a man by the name of Josh Connell. And
he owned the whole island?
He owned most of the island, yes ma'am. He had cows on it, and we'd spend a lot of time on that island and on the river playing. So the river was my playground most of the time. It was one of my big playgrounds growing up.
The St. Johns River?
Yes ma'am.
And you said a playground. Tell me what kind of activities you did along there.
About everything. We'd fish, but water ski, hunt. We just spent a lot of time in boats.
Sounds fabulous.
It was fantastic. Growing up in DeLand was a fantastic place to grow up, but I would imagine most people say where they grew up was fantastic. But DeLand was a small town, a neat little town. It was all inside too. Outside of town, you didn't see any of the box stores. You had little stores like that around town, like the one I know they can't see it, but there's a picture of a country store up there. You had them around town. But growing up, ride your bicycles, ride horses, play. Nighttime, sometimes you go to town and walk around, and I tell people, and it's hard for them to believe, but a lot of people didn't have TV back then. And up on North Woodland Boulevard, you had a donut shop, but you had a TV shop, and you'd go downtown and there'd be people sitting in their chairs watching TV through the window. They'd leave it running. And,
eating donuts.
well, if they could afford them. Most of those people couldn't afford much, but they'd come watch it. And my daddy had a hardware store when I was 11 up through high school, and spend time working there and being around. But it was truly, truly a fantastic town.
What brought your parents here?
My mother came as a child in 1930. Her father was a professor, a Baptist minister and a professor. And he came here to Stetson University, and from what I've always been told, he came to get the library accredited so Stetson could get accredited. And he stayed in the Stetson community until he retired, then, which was about 55, and then after that, he stayed active in the Stetson community till his death. My father came in 1938, I believe it was, for Ford Motor Company. And at the time, the Ford dealership, like everything else, it was downtown. And he came to work for Max Acre. He came from a little town called Mount Vernon, Georgia, actually a smaller town than that, close by our community, but from Mount Vernon, Vidalia, Georgia, down here for Ford Motor Company.
He was a young man then?
Yes, he was. He came as a parts manager and stayed with Ford down here off and on through his whole career. It was off and on between buying and selling, like used car lots, service stations, hardware store, chainsaw business, and politics.
And he was mayor, I understand.
He was mayor, city manager, and city commissioner. He served all three of those positions, which is the only man to ever serve all of those positions in DeLand. And he was mayor once, city manager twice, and city commissioner twice.
So politics must have been talked at around your table.
It was. Daddy was always loved the politics, and he knew when I was getting ready to run for sheriff. He died while I was, actually before I ever announced, but he was excited about me running for sheriff. And
he was proud of you.
Oh, he was excited about that happening. And excuse me, it was a shame he never got to see it. It's kind of funny, the night that I got elected, my brother owned a funeral home in New Smyrna, and he brought his limousine over for us to ride in, so that we'd all be together. And late at night, after we did this at the party, we rode down to the cemetery where my daddy's born. We were going to go down there and have a beer with my daddy. And we got down there, and we were standing there, and they turned the sprinklers on. And I've always I've always blamed. I said that was my daddy and Doug Teal. Doug Teal had owned the cemetery, and they were best friends, and you couldn't even get behind the tree. The only one who survived not getting wet was my mother, because she's smart enough not to get out of the car. But it was.
So you think that was their prank? Yeah.
I swear, they're both buried right there. They had something to do with that.
So your parents met here in DeLand then?
Yes. As a matter of fact, when my daddy first came to town, he lived right over here on San Susie in a boarding house, Miss Martin's boarding house. And my mother actually lived around the corner up on May Street, and then they moved to 418 West Minnesota and lived there for their, my grandfather lived there. Well, actually, later years, right before I totally moved out, I even lived there for a little while.
And where did you and your brothers go to school?
I started school up here. At the time, it was Wisconsin Elementary School, which is right up here on Wisconsin Avenue. And later it was named for the principal, Dempsey Brewster. And then from there just moved right across the football field to DeLand Junior High School. Then I graduated from DeLand High School.
What year was that?
I graduated in 1968.
That was a memorable year for a lot of things nationally.
It was a good year. I mean, there was a lot of memories back then, and we just had a class reunion recently, and a lot of my classmates were there, and it was good to see them, because some of them you haven't seen since then. But it was a lot smaller school, and of course DeLand was a lot smaller. But at the time, when we were there, you didn't have, you had, of course, Taylor up in Pearson, had a high school, and you had DeLand High School, and they took in everybody from Osteen on south. But back then, Deltona was small. I mean, it really was truly 3 areas when they call it. You had the first, second, and third area, and it was that way when I started the sheriff's department. But it was, per se, a fairly large high school, but it really wasn't that large.
It was segregated?
No, ma'am. It was integrated in 1965.
You were there?
Yes, ma'am.
What was that like?
It was different. Naturally, it's something you weren't really ready for or used to. And our first African-American student was a young man by the name of Elvin Johnson. And they came from his parents, I think, were teachers. But Elvin was the first black student. He doesn't sometimes get the credit for that, because there was somebody who graduated before he did, because they came the next year. But Elvin was the first black student there, and I think one of his brothers, or a couple of them, were in the junior high school. And it had to be tough on him. But Elvin came every day. He was there. Whether he wanted to be or not, I don't know. I know it was tough on him. And Elvin and I have gotten to be pretty good friends. Back then, we knew each other, we talked to each other, but we've gotten to be pretty good friends, and he lives up in the Boston area. He
wasn't here for the reunion, I gather.
No, ma'am, he was not.
But you said you had mentioned that you had frequent contact with him.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We talked pretty often. As a matter of fact, he was here this past month. One of his brothers, who was about, I think, 1 year younger than him, and he was in DeLand High the next year, and his brother was an athlete. He was a heck of a football player. But once Elvin broke the barrier, a lot more came. And you can only imagine how tough that had to be on the family, on him, on his brothers. But he successfully did it. He came through it, he graduated, and done very well in life.
That's good to hear. So, what made you decide to go into law enforcement then?
That's kind of a good question, because I never planned on being a law enforcement officer. Now, there's people who told me they thought I would. And I had friends who were in law enforcement. And of course, I had 2 uncles that I idolized. They were FBI agents.
How did that come to be?
Well, they were in Stetson after the war, the twin brothers. One of them graduated Stetson in 51, and one graduated in 50. And they were recruited into the FBI by Ed Duff, who was a career FBI agent stationed in Daytona. And they went to the FBI, and of course they were kind of like heroes when we were kids to us. And my daddy, I knew a lot of the policemen because of my daddy's political work, being city manager, mayor, so I knew all the policemen all the way through. And sometimes when you would get bored, I'd ride with different policemen here in town. And they were friends. And one of my closest friends, a boy by the name of Randy Alino, he was a deputy sheriff. And I originally went into it for a job because I'd planned on being a lawyer. And I went into it to try to work my way through school. And next thing you know, you got 5 years in, and I'd made sergeant after 30 months, I was a very young sergeant. And I was enjoying it. You have 5 years in, and you say, well, you got retirement at that time. You're vested at 10 years, so might as well stick around. It's fun doing it. Now you got 10 years, and I just loved the job and never left it.
What about the job did you love?
What part of it? Mm-hmm. Dealing with people.
So
I love working with people. And it was kind of funny that everybody just about knew where I lived. A lot of people are afraid to let people know where you live, or their phone's unlisted. My phone was always listed. Still, it was in the phone book. People knew where I lived. We had gigantic parties. Everybody come to the parties, and I'd have people come to the house when they had problems. I was kind of that guy you could talk to. They'd come to me, they'd have a warrant on them. They'd come to my house. I had people come get me, and actually one guy called me and wanted to know if I had a warrant, and I called and he did, and he came to get me and took me to jail. And bonded out and took me home. But I was always able to talk to people and be around people, and I always felt like I could kind of be there to help. Parents would bring sometimes their kids who were into stuff to me. And it's just, I loved working with people, being around people. That always gave me a thrill. And I loved the management end of it. And I was fortunate enough that Sheriff Duff sent me to the FBI National Academy in 1989. That's a 3-month academy that 0.5% of law enforcement officers get to go to. And that was, that's an exciting thing that you get to do. It's a fraternity, basically. And it's, you meet law enforcement officers from all over the country, or actually all over the world. We had Nigeria, we had Hong Kong, I don't remember where all they came from, Australia, Philippines,
wow. Just
all over the world. Now at the time I went, there was 201 people, I think it was, in there. Normally they ran about 250, but they'd, I forgot what the reason was back then, but they had to cut back. And it was, you would just meet these people. They were federal law enforcement officers, local law enforcement officers, and you stay in touch with some of them all through your career and still afterwards. I talked to one of them this weekend, as a matter of fact. But the good thing about the FBI Academy, one of the best things is the relationships you build. Like, for instance, if you had something that happened in Southern Pines, North Carolina, you'd call Gerald Galloway up there and say, hey, I need a little help. And this stuff overlaps all over the country. You're somebody in Mobile, Alabama. You'd take and look for a National Academy graduate and call them. So that's one of the biggest things it does, but it's just top-notch education through the University of Virginia. But it's just a top-notch academy that anybody who gets to go to it, well, I'm more proud of that than I am my college degree, even though.
How did the having that training affect your job here? You said there was overlapping between different FBI trained people in the South?
Well, basically, even our agency was a fair-sized agency, and we'd only get an opening every 4 years. But it's what you're supposed to bring back in management type of training. And they have all kinds of classes when you're there. You can go to forensic classes, you can go just a little bit of all kinds of stuff, but you bring that training back. But a lot of it is to open your eyes that there's more of a world out there and how to take and interact with other people and other agencies. And that's a lot of what it did and helped with.
Your uncles, you said, were recruited by an FBI person in Daytona. Did they stick around the area?
No. They back then they did not bring you back to where you lived. They served in, one of them served Chicago, one of them Milwaukee. I think one of them, they transferred them every few years. Kansas City, Washington D.C. One of them uncles served as an instructor at the FBI Academy, and his son even went into the FBI and retired from the FBI.
Was there a lot of FBI interest in this area?
Well, back then, the FBI walked on water the way you looked at it. Now, truly, and you'll talk to local law enforcement officers, sometimes it's hard to work with the FBI. They're so closed-mouthed. They get most information from local people, but they're kind of bad about not handing the information back a lot of times. 9/11 opened a lot of those doors to where there was more contact back and forth. But 9/11 did a lot of that before. It could get very frustrating. But when you had a big case, it had to be federal, bank robbery, kidnapping, something like that, for them to really come in to help you. And we'd know them for that. And we had some notable cases back then that
Can you tell me about some of those?
well, there's one that really, and the problem is with that, I could take the whole hour to talk to you about. But basically, we had a disc jockey that was kidnapped, and it was somewhere roughly 1973.
A local district?
Local. And he was a young man, big guy, very tall. From what I call, he's 6'6", 6'8", somewhere in there, big guy. But he was kidnapped for ransom, actual kidnapping for ransom. And he was kidnapped, from what I recall, it was off of North Stewart Avenue out of
What was his name?
I don't remember the boy's name. I don't remember his name. The kidnapper was a guy by the name of Abel. But that brought in every FBI agent just about in the state to here. And it went on for several days where we were looking. We had, one time it was a $10,000 demand. Now, of course, $10,000 back then was more than this today, but it was a $10,000 demand, and the first pickup was supposed to be in the Nison's parking lot, which is now where the post office is. And we had a couple of our guys supposedly working on the roof all day long, waiting on it, and all they got was sunburn because the guy didn't. Oh, it was, and some people rode through the parking lot. I recognized some of them, but we didn't know. We were searching woods, we were doing everything, and. It centered around the Hotel Putnam, some of that right there, and there was, the pickup was finally made out of the Edstone Park. They left the money in a restroom out there in a paper bag. Well, the kidnapper had another guy by the name of Victor Williams pick up the money. And Victor, he was a pawn. Victor was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And all he was a pawn. Go pick up this money. Well, Victor went in there, picked it up, looked in the bag, and he'd never seen that much money before. Went over to the bar right there, which was Sloan Shady Oak, got somebody to take him home, which that guy had nothing to do with it, George Cook. Anyway, ran him down to Lakeview Drive, Lakeview Drive, to where he lived in almost like a tar paper shack. Told him he was having health issues, thought he was having a heart attack. Well, he was excited about seeing this money. Ran to the house, out the back door, buried the money, back to the house, told him, well, I'm feeling better, take me back. So we're watching, he's being watched, and he had a friend who was a guy that, and I remember the guy's name, but I'm probably dropping too many names on it. We're trying to interview all of these people. I say we, the investigators, all of us were just running, doing grunt work. And anyway, that guy lived at Hotel Putnam. And that night, the FBI went up there and they couldn't find him. Well, they went downstairs and they found him outside. They interviewed him, saw he wasn't involved in it. Well, the next day, we get a tip, and the man called and talking to somebody, one of his friends, and he was asking where he was, and he told them that he was in room 3 and he could see the traffic light at Florida and New York Avenue. And we all zeroed in. And back then, we didn't have enough patrol cars. Some of us run our own vehicles. We zeroed in on the Hotel Putnam, shut it down. First thing they did is ran up to that guy's room, because that's, people didn't realize that it was the same guy that interviewed the night before. And he came running out of the bathroom, and when they kicked the door in and threw his hands up, his pants fell down, reached down, pulled his hands up. I mean, then they recognized it. It wasn't him. I mean, it was a fiasco. The hotel was searched out, and this is all the short version. The hotel was searched out, wasn't there? And we were standing downstairs with Sheriff Duff out in front of the Hotel Putnam, and he was smoking his pipe. And he just turned and started looking around. Just, I mean, it was uncanny. Just uncanny, just looking. And we didn't know what he was thinking. He wasn't saying a word. All of a sudden, he started walking, just straight as an arrow, across the street. There was a couple of apartment complexes over there. All we knew is the boss had something on his mind, and we're following him. We went over there and knocked on the door, and the guy answered the door. Ed Duff knew that man was there somewhere. And that's how we arrested him. But then took him back to the jail. And this is the days before the TV cameras, the TV people were there, and all the news people with everything, you know, from all over, FBI agents. Well, the guy said that, you know, finally admitted that he had taken and kidnapped him, admitted that he had shot and killed him. It could have been a comedy if it hadn't been for that. The things that happened, because there's a lot more things that happened during that thing. In fact, if they had not killed that young man, it could have been a comedy. But he finally said he'd go show them where it was, but not with all the press out there. And I was a young officer at the time. I was 23, 24 at the most, probably 23. Anyway, two FBI agents ran out, jumped in their car, burned rubber backwards in the parking lot, burned rubber forwards, ran up to the front of the parking lot, turned left squealing, and they weren't going anywhere. All they were doing was drawing the press off. And down West New York Avenue, they went, all the press ran out front, watching down the street. They walked this guy out, put him in the back seat of the car I had, and we just drove out the back of the parking lot, and they never knew he was gone. And he took us out to where later was Sand Hill Country Club out in the southwest section of town, close to what had been the county or the city dump. And he had shot that man there, and I'll never forget seeing him. Like I said, he was a big young man, big man. But that's probably one of the more notable, not the most notable, but one of the notable crimes back when I was a young man that the FBI was really involved in.
You mentioned when we talked before that the FBI was interested in Central Florida because of a lot of Klan activity here.
Yes, ma'am.
And that you personally knew the infamous Sheriff Willis McCall.
Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell us about him, a bit about him?
He had to have been probably the biggest racist I ever met in my life, bar none. I can't think of anybody who was more racist. And you know, I was a very young deputy, but you still, back then, you know, he was Central Florida, and I happened to know him because he knew people on this side of the river. And also, I saw him around as a young man. I had the opportunity when they had a Sheriff's Association statewide meeting in Daytona. They actually, at that point, on that dinner, I actually sat between him and Sheriff Polk from Seminole County. And he wasn't hesitant to tell a racial joke or do anything else. Of course, everybody knows what his history was. But he was the best way to put it, the biggest racist I think I ever met in my life.
Did the FBI keep an eye on him?
Well, back then, if you remember, I can't tell you exactly what all was going on across the bridge, but you know, there was books written about him. And he was indicted, I think, from what I recall, and there was a lot of bad things happened over there. But Lake County was a whole different world. Once you crossed that bridge back then, it was a whole different world. And we really didn't like getting over there too much. I mean, it was,
Had a reputation then.
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And Sheriff Duff was, you know, he came from the Bronx, and he was the first professional law enforcement executive around here.
How did he get down here?
Well, the FBI sent him down here basically to keep an eye on the Ku Klux Klan, from what I've always understood. That was one of his major issues. And I remember, I told you on the phone the other day, one time they were having well, they tried several different things to get the Klan resurgence around here. None of them worked, really. And at one time, this area out east between here and New Smyrna was one of the biggest Klan strongholds in the state of Florida. But, and as you mentioned, when they marched in the Christmas parade, that didn't go over too well.
That was 1972?
Somewhere in there, yes, ma'am.
You remember that?
I was not at the parade.
Do you remember hearing people talk
Oh,
about
I knew it was there, but I wasn't at the parade, no. But I do know that it didn't work out well for them, because one thing is they got visitors. They got visitors and didn't work out for them too well. From, you know.
From the black community?
From the black community. They got some visitors, didn't work out too well. And then they tried another recruiting effort, and it was up in the north end of the county. And Sheriff Duff actually sent me and Dale Anderson. Dale was, I believe I was a sergeant at the time. I might have been a lieutenant. And Dale was a rank below me. He sent the two of us up there to keep an eye on them. He wanted them to know that we knew they were there and we were watching them. I mean, they sent us not undercover. Everybody knew, you know, West Volusia County, we all knew each other, and the people up there knew me, so it wasn't like it was going to be anything secret. He sent us in uniform so they knew we were there and knew why we were there.
Did you get any feedback from that?
There wasn't much said. We did not have any issues. We didn't have one issue at that thing.
Just to make a presence.
It was just, we're here. We are here. And I, you know, it's been so long, I couldn't even tell you what all happened. I do know that, you know, I got a picture of it somewhere. But that was why we were there, was because Sheriff Duff wanted them to know that this is not going unnoticed.
So Sheriff Duff wasn't elected by people here. He was appointed to come here?
No. Sheriff Duff retired from the FBI and was elected.
He came down here.
He came down here. He put in 27 years with the FBI, and then he ran for sheriff of Volusia County.
So you were saying that he was the first professionally trained?
He was the first professional law enforcement officer.
So things must have been a bit different after he came.
Well, when he came in, it was different. He started looking for professionalism. And at the time, times were changing. That's about the time we came across, well, about, I think like 69 is when the police standards first started in. And you could get grandfathered in, but he even wanted to send his deputies who were grandfathered in. And you had to, back then it was a mandatory 160 hours, and actually in Daytona they taught 200 hours. But then there was a lot of other courses that they would bring in and send us to, and FBI taught a lot of courses. They'd send in instructors. They came in with the LEAP program, which is Law Enforcement Assistance Program. And that was to try to get us educated. Because back then you didn't find, some of the people who trained me, I'm not too sure even had high school education. But they did, you know, they sent us, for instance, I finished out Daytona Beach Community College, then I went to Rollins College and got my degree. We were lucky because Sheriff Duff had hired some really good people like Sid Massey, Wayne Allen, these people that were really good people. And we had most of them had some experience from before, like Sid came from Atlanta, and he wasn't much older than me. But back then, he was a grizzled old veteran for a young kid. And you had them that kind of took us under the wing to teach us, help us through, and bring us around.
Did you see a big impact in
Things changed.
the law? How did they change?
One thing is the caliber of people. They wanted more people who had a little bit of education. And I've always said, education doesn't make a good cop. Education makes a good cop better. But it was education, how to do it, how to work with people, forensics. There was just a lot of things that changed, and it changed so rapidly. You stop and look at it, even since I've been out, and I've only been out since 2016, and I just can't get over some of the technology changes that have come about. You know, we were starting to look at some of these things, but it's jumped so fast. But back then, when I first started, old tube radios that worked part of the time, the old bubblegum machines on the roof that, you know, that we'd put an aircraft landing light to make them a little bit brighter in it. You know, they'd spin around and you'd watch them. We went to the different light bars, and some of them would ping off of you, you know. You'd hear them ping, and, you know, and the radios, you couldn't talk to anybody. Just the way that people acted, you just started more of internal affairs to watch what's going on. It just jumped leaps and bounds. Then programs later came in that we put in programs so that would track people who have too many. I did that when I was sheriff. Put in a program so it would track if people who have too many use of force instances. You know, it'd so note them so you could take and watch it. Are they stepping out of line? What are they doing? But things, it's just changed totally to where the uneducated cowboy cop until where they're working in to the professional educated law enforcement officer. Now, was it fun back then? It was an absolute ball. You didn't want to go home a lot of times. They didn't pay us anything. I started at $476 a month. And I worked at Goodyear Tire over here and unloading furniture trucks that come through here, you know, so we could have a little bit of extra spending money and get through. But then it jumped to, if you were already certified, it was 501, 476 and 501. Then it went from 501 to 526 while I was in rookie school. And back then, when you were in school, or wasn't go to school, and then come to work, you know, when you're done with all your schooling, we'd take and go to school in the morning, come to work night shift. Same thing with college. You'd be working, but they were very good about, Sheriff Duff was very good about working with us. Let us run, you know, we'd have a college class in Orlando, and back then there wasn't much traffic down in Rollins or wherever we were going. You could run down there, take a class while you work, and turn around and run back. You'd be out of the county for an hour and a half, 2 hours. But they wanted to get that education and bring the caliber of law enforcement up. Trying to get away from those old days of this just thump their heads. And more stuff came along about, and more needs to be done about mental health. Trying to get you, domestic violence is a prime example. When I first started, domestic violence was just, that's a family issue. Then they sent us to a school. I remember going to a school down in Sarasota. Went down there and they taught us down there de-escalation. Well, de-escalation is a funny thing. You'll hear words come up, they'll drop off, then later somebody will come up with some exciting new program, which is the same thing all over again, basically. But de-escalate them, get them turned around away from each other, talk to them, calm them down. Problem was you're walking off and leaving them. So they're back at it again. But, you know, it's just working de-escalation programs, or how do you do something so you don't have to use the violence, and it keeps expanding more and more and more. We started, at the moment it's slipping my mind, the program, but it was a big program about it, and it was de-escalation. It wasn't what it was called, but they actually brought in trainers, and it was, all of my people had to go to it when they came to rookie school, and it was working with them. They'd even bring in people to play autistic people, which was, you know.
You did role play.
You role play, because people don't know how to deal with autism. And if you don't know how to deal with it, you think that maybe being a problem. What, you know, that they're ignoring you or they're doing something, but they're not. They have an issue, and they may just be scared to death of the law enforcement officer. You just don't know. And this is some of the things you have to take and more going. And in law enforcement, they have to take and start putting the mental health aspect back into this. Most of your mental health facilities are basically closed down or just, not putting the money there.
You sound pretty passionate about this issue.
I really am, because it is a big issue. Probably a third of the people that are in jail are not criminals per se. It's a mental health issue. And the sad part about it is, a few years back, and Donnie Esslinger, the sheriff of Seminole County, was one of the big pushers on this. We were trying to get it so we could take and go in, and when we see the people going off their medication or starting to go over the edge, that we could pick them up and bring them in. Well, truly, a lot of the people on the other side of the fence thought we were up to something. And we weren't. What we were up to was try to keep these people from getting out there and either victimizing somebody or becoming victims and ending up back into the system.
Yeah, but it's still a big issue today with the homeless on the streets in DeLand.
Yes, and that's a very, very hard thing to deal with. And your public officials catch a lot of flack over it. You can't just throw money at everything. And you only have so much money to throw. It's coming out of everybody's pocket. Now, how much can you afford to do? The best thing, you need to work on the situational homeless is the big thing, and the other side, mental health. The situational homeless, the ones who gone through a divorce or gone through some kind of financial issue, the ones who are living in their car because something happened, lost their job. That's the ones, to me, that you want to put most of your money into to get them back on their feet again. There's some that are just happy living in the woods. And there's some that truly have the mental health issue. They don't know how to live in society. And it's a big problem. And if I had answers, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be making money somewhere and flying around in my own private jet, because you'd have an answer nobody else does. So I can sit here and say all I want. But it is a big issue. The homeless shelters do help. You can't even do anything legally with a lot of them if you don't have somewhere to send them.
What were the big issues when you were running for sheriff?
Back then, we had a lot of problem with internal turmoil in our agency. It was an unhappy agency that had low morale. There was also some issues laying out there about being done on the interstate is picking up dope money, which the majority of the money was dope money, but it was still sometimes stepping over the line. And if you take one person's money that earned it legitimately, that's wrong. That was issues.
So, corruption.
I'm sorry?
Would you call that corruption?
No. I truly believe that the leader back then was honest. I always said that the man, if a sack of money landed in his backyard, the next day every cent would be on the desk. Never that. But I'm not going to get too deep into that. I'm not here to take and talk. But it was a lot of the problem was bad morale, and bad morale stretches through to a lot of things. It was hard to get people hired and keep them. But
Were
I
you
really
able
don't.
to turn
I
that?
really don't. I'm not here to do that.
Right.
So I just
Understood.
simply leave that out.
Understood. What would you say were some of your proudest accomplishments during your career there?
Well, I didn't have any problem hiring. Really had no problem hiring. Matter of fact, I even had to go to my fellow police chiefs and tell them we were at we had our chiefs meeting every month, and we developed a lot of TAC teams and different types of things together. Had other police departments on our SWAT teams, on our narcotics task forces. Well, they'd come over here and your guys would recruit those people over. And that's not fair to the police departments when they send you good people and you take them away. So I had a great working relationship with those guys, great working relationship. And we put a policy in place that I would not take an application from anybody until they were at least a year off of any of those teams.
And that included the City of DeLand Police?
Oh, yes, ma'am, DeLand and all of them. We had a great working relationship. And that's how you get things done, is working together. And those TAC teams, it's a force multiplier. And it doesn't matter. If it happens in DeLand, it's going to stretch into the county. If it's in the county, it's going to come into DeLand. And if it's in DeLand, you're going to have it in Daytona. So we built the Volusia Bureau of Investigation. That was one of the big things. And that was a narcotics task force that was countywide. And when we did that, we had to fight the other task forces in Central Florida because they really didn't want that done, because back then there was a lot of money in narcotics that you were taking away. And they wanted to kind of keep a hand in that. And we had to, finally Customs came in, so in order to have that task force, you had to have a federal partner, and Customs came in. But one of our big problems was the narcotics task forces were stationed in Orlando, and it's hard to get Orlando people to come up here. You know, by the time you fight traffic and get here, you don't have much time to do stuff once you get here. So the Volusia Bureau of Investigation was a real big deal. Really, we got to where we knocked the top off of a lot of big organizations. Then you started getting them coming up lower instead of the ones who had been established here for quite some time. Now, the DEA teams did a good job, don't get me wrong. Just we couldn't get them here enough. Probably one of my biggest accomplishments was consolidated communications, which you have one dispatch center for all of the county. And that had been something that they'd been trying to get interest in for many years. They actually, when I came in, they had a task force working on it, but it wasn't going anywhere. You know, there was distrust with the police departments back then, with the county, with the county and with the sheriff's office back then. And like I said, we worked and closed up a lot of those problems. And finally, it was just going on and on and on. And my first chief deputy was a man by the name of Bill Lee, who was a class act, go-get-em cop. And him and I thought so much alike that we'd meet in between on a lot of occasions. Our offices, our desks backed up against each other through a wall. And we'd meet coming down the hall thinking about the same thing. But finally one day I said, we're just going to start it, see where it goes, because it wasn't going anywhere. And that's where the consolidated communications came from. And then we brought it a step further because we still had another communications center in Volusia County. And finally we put it under the general fund, so you weren't, we talked to county council into going to a general fund, so you weren't having to go to the cities and negotiate a contract and maybe step to where this guy's getting a little more than another. And that's where that came from. And it's always communications. At the time that we first started it, there was a white paper out that said it would save the county $12 million a year. And I'm not talking about the county council. I'm talking about all the county residents, $12 million from the police departments and all having one. Plus the communications is so much quicker. Say, for instance, if a DeLand policeman got in trouble back then, it'd have to go from the policeman to the dispatcher to our dispatcher back. And by the time that secret game was finished with, it was an issue, whereas now they're on the same radio frequency and they hear each other. Made for closer working relationship. But communications it's a nationwide problem. The equipment's there pretty well, but it's a high stress job. I often classify it as the hardest job in law enforcement. You know, a policeman can get out there, and I'm even talking about when I was out there on the road. You have a bad call and you go into the next call, at least you got a few minutes to decompress. Sitting there back there behind that console trying to get information from somebody who's all upset and excited, and you can't get enough information to give to a policeman that wants more information. He gets there, maybe he gets in trouble. Now that dispatcher's trying to get them, and they're sitting there behind that console doing everything they can to try to help. It's a high pressure job. A tough job, and it's hard to recruit, and it takes almost more training for them than for a law enforcement officer.
Very interesting. I wouldn't have thought that.
Well, most people don't realize that. But they do a magnificent job, and now, it used to be in the old days, when the 911 phone rang, it was actual audible. Now it's through their headsets, and you'd go in there, like for instance, during a storm, and all you heard was that phone going off. It's a pressure cooker, but they do such a great job.
Based on your experience, what advice would you give to a young person today? Not necessarily one looking to go into law enforcement, but if you want to comment on that too.
Well, there's several things on that. It depends. If you're going to get in any kind of line that you want to get, let me shorten that up. Education. And they're starting to think more and more about this. It may be the formal college education, but that's not the answer to everything. And I truly believe for many years, one of the problems with the education system is they were trying to prepare every kid. You know, every kid deserves a college education. Every kid does deserve a college education, but it's not for every kid. They need to go back to more vocational training. Of course, you run into the problem with the federal government, some of their OSHA rules and all, it makes it harder to train these kids, but get them into building, carpentry work, block laying, mechanics, but where they can make a good, solid living and teach them how to do it. Teach them how to use a checkbook, how to do their, you know, the math that they're going to need, not something they're not going to need. Put it into their interest and make sure in that vocational training that you have the carrot out there so that they can take and be involved in the sports and other things for them. But that's a big thing is education, set your sights on something, go for it. And then once you go for it, start putting money aside right off the bat.
And how would you like to be remembered?
Being fair and ethical.
Tell us about your children.
Like I told you, I came from a family of 5 boys. And I'm married to a radio personality, which is bad because if you get mad at your husband, you tell the neighbors, and instead she tells Central Florida.
And what's her name?
Leslie Gale. Yeah, she's on Magic 107.7. It came out of the TV background. She has one son, a son by the name of Chase, and Chase is just a fine young man. I'm married, I have a daughter, Casey, and Casey is in. She works for a company that's similar like what Spectrum stuff does. She lives here in DeLand, and she does most of their internal media stuff. She kind of drifted around about where she was going to live. She went to school in Savannah and then graduated from SCAD. From SCAD, she went to Georgia Southern. For a while, I think she wanted to be a professional student. Then she moved to Orlando. And of course, like all the kids, I'll never come back to DeLand, and here she is. Chase, he's a graduate of Flagler College, and he's in the tattoo business. He's quite an artist. He does that, and he also does murals. And both the kids are very artistic. I don't know where they got it. I'm sure not artistic. I can't draw a pitch black night. But
do you have grandchildren?
No, ma'am. No grandchildren. And I've lived in the same house for 46 years. I'm one of the longer residents of Glenwood. We have
That's a nice community.
Oh, I love it. Love it. I've lived out there, since 1978. And I know y'all talked to Wilma, and Wilma tries to tell you she's the longest resident. She's not. I've been there longer than her because she moved away for 2 years. And I could get on her all the time about that. We got that fun. We got that friendly rivalry, going about it. But we've watched them come and go, just all the neighbors around us. Age has caught up with them. Beautiful little community. But once again, like DeLand. DeLand was a small, beautiful little community, and we were talking earlier, everything was downtown except for the little country stores. And you had country stores all around. You had, for instance, out on Old New York Avenue, you had a couple of them out there, one at the railroad tracks and one just this side of Emmy's. Old gas station and stores. I had one up there on North Orange Avenue. Had just different parts of DeLand. You'd have the country stores. Grocery stores, you either went to Stoudemire's or Setzer's, which was downtown later, Kirkland's, and then things started spreading out. Good and bad come together with growth.
You mentioned that Disney had a big impact in...
Oh, that's what brought people to Florida. Before Disney, Florida was... It was just not that big. Orlando wasn't a big town. Not to us it was, but Orlando wasn't a big town. And around here, if you wanted to buy Cub Scout or Boy Scout uniforms or stuff, you had to go to Daytona. I mean, we had some good clothing stores here. You had B.M. Fountains, you had Gibbs, you had some good stores here, you know, that were the old men's stores and women's stores. But, you know, if you really wanted to get into something, you went out of town. You know, that was, you know, that was just how it was. The growth is good and bad. It's going to be here. Volusia County back in the early 70s was probably 160,000 people. Now it's probably north of 550,000 people. And everywhere you go, you see growth. And people don't like it. They want a tree cut down for their house, but don't cut one down for the next person's house. And it's hard to stop because of rules and regulations out there. State steps in and takes away the locals' ability to have home rule. That's a major, major issue. They've taken a lot of that ability away. You know, you have like the Burt Harris Act, which gives the people a right to do something with the property, which, I mean, really, if somebody owns property and all of a sudden all they can do is pay taxes on it, that's a problem. So it's a catch-22. And I was, you know, I was also, besides being in law enforcement for 43 years with the county, I was a county councilman for 4 years after that. And that is one thing that I do. As far as we can find, I hold the distinction of being the longest serving officer in the Volusia, not officer, individual in the Volusia County Sheriff's Office. Now, not the longest continuous service, just overall service, because we had a couple people. I think John Bonavere served a little more time as continuous than I did because I retired at 26 and a half. Al Pagliari. There was some people who served more straight time, but not overall time.
You hold that distinction.
As far as we can see and find, yes. Because it used to be when a sheriff was elected, everybody changed.
In the government? In the department?
In the agency.
In the agency.
Sheriff's office. Back then, when it changed, most everybody changed. And you didn't have many civilians. Somebody on a radio maybe, in fact, years and years ago, didn't have a radio, but it was, you know, as far as we know, I'm the longest serving.
Can you leave us with a funny story? There must have been some humorous things that happened.
There were so many funny things that happened over the years. I mean, you're just dealing with people. Probably some of the funniest is things that happened inside my office. You know, we used to have what we call Uncle Ben talks when somebody kind of stepped out of line. We'd try to bring them in and talk to them instead of doing something bad to them. And some of them, you know, I can't really repeat them, but I'd sit there. And some of the things these people did and thought they were getting away with, they didn't realize it. We were young cops at one time. We did get away with them, and some of them we didn't. But there was, just off the top of my head, can I just tell you one in particular? No. As soon as I walk out of here, I'll think of something. But it was, being in law enforcement is not all doom and gloom. And I loved the job. I loved law enforcement. I loved the sheriff. To me, that was, you know, the sheriffs used to say that's the best kept secret in the world, being a sheriff. You want sometimes people to know what a great job it was, you know. But there's just a lot of funny things.
So Uncle Ben stories, Uncle Ben conversations.
A lot of the old timers, that's what they used to call me, was Uncle Ben. We had an individual, Carl Brinkley, was one of the first deputy sheriffs, and I think the first sergeant. And they had all through the years, and my whole career.
He was the first black
I think officer. He was the first, but he was back under, I think he was started maybe under even Tucker, I'm not sure. But he was one of the pioneers of that. And when I came in, we had black officers and some really class act people. And one of the biggest problems about it is trying to hire your minorities. It's getting better as time goes on, but a lot of it's peer pressure. their peers, where they stand with them. And that creates some issues. But you see more minorities coming in, and you need to reflect the diversity of your county. But it's not an easy thing. And I tell people, I one time had in the News Journal, talking to me about it. And I said, I just walked through your newsroom. About all I saw was white faces. Are y'all racist? It's the same thing. It was finding the people who wanted to do that kind of job.
Did you know Lewis McCrae? Does that ring a bell?
Who?
Lewis McCrae. He was a graduate of Euclid High School in 1916, one of the leaders of the sit-in, and he was here in town for the weekend for the plaque ceremony. And
I don't know that I know him or not.
he said that he was so impressed with the DeLand police and the protection they gave the students that he actually joined law enforcement.
You talking about back when they had to sit in? Well, my father was city manager when that happened. And I mean, there was, the people, well, what are we going to do? Nothing. The people come to town, and we're not going to have an issue. But my father was city manager when that went down. And he said, we're not going to have a problem. The people want to go in and sit down, we're going to let the people go and sit down.
Now, was he responsible for the police covering the students?
My daddy was city manager who hired and fired the police chiefs. The city commission and the mayor hire and fire the city manager, and the city manager runs the city. And they just bound to determine DeLand was not going to be like a lot of places and have that happen. We never had that, hadn't had that issue, weren't going to have it.
Very interesting, because as you know, in the rest of the South, the police stood by or they participated in the victimization.
Turn fire hoses on them, turn dogs loose. And it was a sad time in our history, a necessary time in our history to get by that. When you take people like Rosa Parks, says, I'm not going to sit, I'm going to sit down. That took a lot of guts.
Took a lot of guts for these high school students, because most of the sit-ins around the country were college students.
We'll go back to Eldon. 5 years after that, and he's at DeLand High School by himself. Takes a lot of guts.
Do you think that experience that you had as a young man in high school and befriending him influenced you in any way?
Oh yeah. I mean, before, my father had a very, very good rapport with the black community. They were a major part of our hardware store business. Nobody said they had to come to Jack Johnson Hardware. And
they weren't turned away?
No, they came to Jack Johnson Hardware because they'd give them a fair shake, take care of them, help them out. And his daddy had been here for a long time and had gained their respect. And he tried to do things, sidewalks, swimming pool. You had the Chisholm Pool, and there was not a white pool in DeLand per se. We had places to go. We could go to Lake Lindley. And there was a few swimming pools people had around here. It wasn't like a great big thing when we were young. I mean, there was some here and there.
And who built the Chisholm?
City.
The city did. And that was under your father?
That was back during his reign.
Very interesting, because I've wondered what made DeLand different.
That's an interesting thing to really ponder. And I don't know, was it partially the seclusion because we did sit, outside of Orlando, but far enough that Orlando was a trek. Daytona, you didn't just run to Daytona to run to Daytona back then. And you kind of knew each other. It didn't happen overnight that it got all better. But I don't know, it's something that's, I guess you say it's above my pay grade.
Well, the city was founded by two pretty ideological people.
Well, you stop and look, you got Lou Gim Gong over there that was accepted. When was that? Late 1800s?
Is that the guy that has the big monument in the cemetery?
Now, you're talking about Roy Cook, who was the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan.
Did you know him?
No, ma'am. He was dead before I was born. And it used to be the people sneak in there and paint that thing red. It was a flaming cross, they called it. But no, that's, I did not, no, ma'am.
But there was lore about him, I'm sure.
I can't tell you a lot about him, but he was,
He was a big somebody in the Klan. I heard 2,000 people came to his funeral.
Yes, ma'am. Well, that's, originally the Klan was because the carpetbaggers from the north, and then it just turned, and it lied. I don't know that much about it, but it's a lot of it. Your violence would be where you had the violent leaders.
Like McCall.
Like the McCalls. But it's just like the Harriet Moore, the Harriet and James, I think it's James Moore, over in Mims. It took a leader somewhere who was willing to say, go do it, and then to find some very brutal people to do it. And if you sit down and read some of those books, it was believed that two Klansmen came out of Apopka who were so violent that even the other Klan were afraid of them and didn't want to be around them, from what I recall of reading in that book. And to blow up a family, that takes a...
On Christmas Day.
Yes, ma'am. That takes about as low a count of an individual as you can find. People like that just don't belong in society. But that was another one right there. They call it the bomb heard around the world. And the sad part is these people who, they gave their lives, but it affected a lot of change.
Sure did.
So that they were heroes that didn't know it. It affected change because nobody in reasonable society can accept or justify that kind of action.